Members of the cult led by the convicted felon Donald Trump have long made excuses for him, and it seems there is nothing he could do to lose their support. So who are Trump supporters, and why do they support him so much? Be sure to get your copy of Red Hats, a pocket guidebook listing over 1,000 companies that support Donald Trump. Make Lying Wrong Again pins and hats and anti-Trump stickers at ProfessorPride.com. You might have seen Trump supporters in the comments of almost every news article for the past 10 years, defending everything the convicted felon Donald Trump ever does. In fact, Trump famously said he can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he wouldn't lose a single voter. No matter how many facts or what sort of evidence you put in front of them, they will call your evidence fake news, while claiming their feelings and beliefs are facts. So it made us begin to wonder, who are Trump supporters? And why do they defend him even if his actions actively hurt them time and again? Let's start off with that first question. Who are Trump supporters? In 2016, 88% of his supporters were white, but his audience has actually gotten way more diverse over the years. And I know Trump supporters would hate me saying this, but Trump is now the diversity hire. In 2024, only 78% of his audience was white, while 3% were black, 10% were Hispanic, 3% were Asian, and 4% were other races. You might be screaming at your TV right now, wondering how the hell 10% of his audience is Hispanic, when Trump's main talking point is mass deportation of Hispanic people, even those that are here as naturalized citizens. But in 2016, only 6% of his audience was Hispanic, 7% in 2020, and now 10% in 2024. So his support from the Hispanic community has only grown even as he continues to send his military after them. In fact, when you just look at the Hispanic community alone, 47% of them voted for Trump over Kamala Harris in 2024. Unsurprisingly, Trump's voters are mostly males. If you look at all men voting in 2024, 55% of them voted for Trump compared to 43% for Kamala Harris. By the way, that 43% includes my husband and myself, so don't blame us. But even though you might assume this would just be from older men, 49% of male voters under the age of 50 voted for him, compared to 48% for Kamala Harris. As for the women, 46% of women voters chose Trump in 2024. You might be wondering, how old is the average Trump supporter? But the truth is, they are pretty even across the board. While Trump dominated voters who were born before the 1960s, he did fairly well among those born before 1990 as well. And even in the younger generations born after 1990, Trump gained 13% margins compared to when he ran against Biden, and gained 24% margins compared to running against Hillary Clinton. When it comes to education, a majority of his supporters never went to college, but in the past 8 years, he has gained more popularity among college graduates than he started out with in 2016. 69% of his supporters live in small towns across the country, but still a third of those living in urban areas support him too. His supporters are deeply religious, with 64% of those who attend church voting for him multiple times. Ultimately, with all of this data, the average Trump supporter is a white male under the age of 50 who never went to college, lives in a small town, and goes to church at least once a month. So why did Republicans vote for Trump in the first place? We know that Trump committed treason and tried to overthrow our government, so what was so important for them to vote him back into office anyway? One of the largest studies we found asked Trump supporters to rank which topics were most important to them when deciding who to vote for. 93% of them chose the economy as their number one most important issue. 82% chose immigration as the second most important issue. But when they were asked how they felt about other topics, only 11% of his supporters said climate change was important at all to them. Only 18% said racial and ethnic inequality was important at all, and 35% said abortion was important. Overall, 94% of his supporters said Trump clearly explained his policies to them, even though we found evidence of Trump saying he supports both sides of nearly every issue. 86% of them said he would change Washington for the better. Another 12% said Trump would be neutral and not change much at all in our country. But if you're a math nerd like me, you noticed 86 plus 12 is 98. But as it turns out, the remaining 2% of Trump supporters said Trump would negatively impact the country, but they still voted for him anyway. Another reason people voted for Trump was social media. 20% of Americans say they get their news from influencers on social media, and 66% of Americans say social media influencers help them better understand current events. So, thank you for that, by the way. This means a large chunk of Americans turn to social media to better understand news, instead of legacy media networks. And while more influencers talked about Trump than they did Kamala Harris, and right-leaning influencers posted far more often, the posts and videos even liberal-leaning influencers were making were severely more critical of Kamala Harris than they were critical of Trump. Even the liberal-leaning influencers who were critical of Trump severely backed off of being critical of him as soon as the election was over, which just sounds to me like they gave up the fight. Once Trump got into office again, Trump immediately pardoned everyone convicted of trying to overthrow the government on January 6, 2021. But 57% of his supporters said it would be unacceptable for him to pardon friends or supporters who have been convicted of any crime. Trump has been widely criticized for hiring loyalists, but only 42% of his supporters said it would be acceptable for him to fire government workers if they were not loyal to him. As Trump went through his first 100 days in office, the second time, he began enacting Project 2025, a manifesto calling for the end of America as we know it. A major part of enacting this plan is through executive orders, which our founding fathers were very much opposed to. But 58% of Trump supporters say it would be acceptable for him to use executive orders to make his policies if he cannot get his priorities through Congress. You know, the legal way to get things through. That begs the question, if his audience wants him to enact his policies, regardless of how Congress feels about it, do they want him to work with Congress at all? Well, no. 60% of his supporters say it is extremely important for Trump to push hard for his policies, regardless of whether Democrats agree. Only 43% of his supporters say Trump should find some common ground with Democrats to get his policies passed. But interestingly, on the campaign trail, Trump continually made chants saying "lock her up" or made comments about Hunter Biden's laptop. So it should come as no surprise to us that 54% of Trump supporters feel it is perfectly acceptable to send federal law enforcement officials to investigate Democratic political opponents. So what do Trump supporters want Trump to do while in office? Let's look at some major topics and see. When it comes to guns, 73% of Trump supporters feel gun violence is not a problem at all in America. Now, my husband and I are both proud gun owners and are even supporters of our local gun ranges. But to say gun violence is not a problem at all in a country with more mass shootings each year than days in that year is absurd. When it comes to the police, 88% of his supporters say it is important to maintain public respect for the police. But while the Constitution guarantees that everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and even criminals have the same human rights as everyone else, only 58% of Trump supporters say it is important to respect the rights of people suspected of a crime. Considering a disproportionate amount of black people are harassed by the police, it brings us to our next topic, racial inequality. Only 60% of Trump supporters say it is important to treat all racial and ethnic groups equally in the eyes of the government. This means 40% say it is perfectly fine for the government to discriminate based on your race alone. Trump supporters were also asked if they felt that black people living in America today are still dealing with the side effects of slavery and discrimination. But 75% of them said they do not think that slavery has any ripple effects in today's society. Because as we all know, everyone is treated equally and everything is fine now. So if Trump supporters don't care about gun violence or race, what do they care about? 45% of Trump supporters feel that in order to be a good person, you need to have a deep belief in God first. That's likely why 45% of them disagree with our founding fathers, who said that we should separate church and state. Yes, 45% of Trump supporters say that religion should not be kept separate from government policies. And the same 45% say, when the Bible and the will of the American people disagree with each other, the Bible should have more influence on U.S. laws than the will of the people who live here. When it comes to marriage, 60% of his supporters say that marriage and having children should be a priority all of us have in life. And while I am happily married and I want kids someday soon, it shouldn't be a requirement of being an American, especially when Trump is doing everything he can to make it harder and more expensive to raise a family in America. But Donald Trump has been widely speculated to be a puppet of Russia's dictator, Vladimir Putin. So how does his audience feel about the Russia-Ukraine war? 40% of Americans feel Trump is capable of bringing peace between Russia and their victim, Ukraine. Meanwhile, 59% of Americans feel they're not confident that Trump can make wise decisions about the war. 33% of Americans say Trump is favoring Russia too much, while 6% of Americans, who, let's face it, are probably Russian spies, say Trump is favoring Ukraine too much. Furthermore, 28% of Americans say Trump is striking the right balance of support to Russia and Ukraine, even though Russia attacked Ukraine for no reason, and Ukraine is still suffering as we speak. But 18% of Americans feel Trump is providing too much support to Ukraine, the victim in the whole situation. That brings us to our favorite topic of all. How do Trump supporters feel about the LGBTQ community? This one might shock you because there are way more LGBTQ people who support Trump than you might realize. In fact, 20% of LGBTQ adults in America lean Republican, but 78% of LGBTQ adults feel Trump's policies will negatively impact their lives. While Donald Trump made it abundantly clear many times that he feels gay marriage should be banned, shockingly, 49% of his supporters believe same-sex marriage should be allowed by our government. 47% of Trump supporters say that more people identifying as lesbian, gay, or bisexual is a good thing for society. But sadly, this is where our similarities end. When it comes to the T in LGBT, Trump supporters have overwhelming hatred for them. 92% of Trump supporters believe gender identity is a hoax and should match your biological sex no matter what, even though the science favors gender identity being valid. This is why Trump keeps talking about transgender people over and over again, because statistically speaking, it's the thing his audience hates the most. But the LGBTQ community doesn't do any favors here to help. A not so insignificant portion of our own community feels trans people should have laws restricting their rights. In fact, 15% of LGBTQ adults feel trans individuals should use public restrooms matching their sex assigned at birth. 41% of LGBTQ adults feel trans athletes should compete on teams that match their sex assigned at birth. 3% oppose protections for trans people from discrimination in jobs, housing, and public spaces, such as restaurants and stores. 13% oppose health insurance companies being required to cover medical care for gender transitions. Finally, 28% of our community agrees with laws that make it illegal for healthcare professionals to help someone younger than 18 with medical care for a gender transition. So MAGA and the LGBTQ community sort of agree, at least in part, that healthcare professionals should not be performing surgery on children younger than 18 years old. So I guess it's a good thing then that it's already illegal and no doctor in our country is performing gender-affirming surgery on kids. So we agree on something that's already not happening. But now that Trump's in office again and enacting his Project 2025 plan, it leaves us with two final questions. How does each party feel Trump is doing right now, and how do they feel about their party overall? 83% of Democrats feel it is extremely important that their elected officials push hard against Trump's policies when they disagree. But 44% of Democrats feel their elected officials still need to find common ground with Trump so they can work together. 74% of Democrats say their elected officials are doing a fair or poor job at pushing back against Trump's policies when they disagree. And 78% feel their elected officials are only doing a fair or poor job at finding common ground. I will say this one sort of confused me because so far in the data, it seems there is no common ground between MAGA and Democrats. Not only does MAGA think that the problems we're facing are not important at all, but they want us all arrested for even questioning the authority of Trump. So I'm not sure how Democratic elected officials can do better at finding common ground that simply doesn't exist. Overall, polls of Democrats and Republicans combined say Trump's approval rating is extremely low, with only 38% of Americans saying they currently approve of the job Trump is doing. But when it comes to Republicans alone, 81% of them say Trump is doing an excellent job to this day. So we might disagree wildly on what Trump should do in office, or what facts are, or what the truth even is anymore, but overall, Republicans still massively approve of every single thing Trump is doing, from giving billionaire friends of his tax cuts, to cutting Medicaid, to cutting funding for our local programs, helping your community, to forcing local school districts to raise their taxes, to deporting American citizens, to the army parade that cost us millions of dollars, and everything in between. They still support him by a wide margin. Perhaps Trump was right. He could probably shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single voter. After all, he committed treason and tried to overthrow our entire federal government and is selling merchandise inside of the White House nowadays. But to this day, he has only gained support, which is perhaps the most frightening thing of all.